It's a new day, and with cautious optimism, we rise once more, setting forth on a new and different journey. I'm Jeff Oppenheim, filmmaker, content creator, digital journalist, and storyteller, and today I invite you to Washington, D.C. And as we travel forth on today's journey, please make sure to take the time now to click subscribe. Today's journey takes us to Washington, D.C., the day after the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Although they probably haven't had time to unpack yet, they are already hard at work. And this administration, let's face it, has been charged with tasks that probably none other ever has been. They not only have to come up with a plan to heal us from COVID-19, but also to recover from the imminent fiscal crisis that the pandemic wrought. There are also the various acts, some might even say egregious human rights violations, that were brought on by the previous administration, which not only have to be analyzed, but probably dismantled. But those scars left on this nation run so much deeper, and the world saw it come into plain sight during the insurrection on this nation's capital. Well, since we're all about perspective on this show, and trying to gain through that perspective some resource, I thought I'd bring one of my preferred resources, someone I talk to not just on camera, but also seek out his opinion off camera, Lew Nescott Jr., because of his professional background, having worked for many, many years with the U.S. Department of Defense and State. I thought he would be a perfect person to bring to the show and introduce you, particularly with his background on terrorism. So, Lew, thank you for joining us again today.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me. It's great to be with you.
Lew, I know you just returned from Washington, D.C., a city obviously you know very well, having lived in and worked in for many years. I want to first ask you for your take on the inauguration of Team Biden-Harris, and ask you what you saw that stands out in your minds of, first of all, an inauguration held in the time of a pandemic, and for that matter, what you may have heard in terms of takeaways for us of what's coming in this changing of the guards, if you would.
I guess what stands out most in my mind was the size of the crowd, which was as small, perhaps a few hundred people, as it was intimate when compared to past inaugurations. And although COVID dictated the size, the insurrection on January 6th dictated the security posture, which had transformed Washington into a military fortress with acres of perimeter fencing, barbed wire, and checkpoints that were supported by 25,000 National Guard troops drawn from all 50 states.
In contrast, I want to ask you about the day after, both literally and metaphorically, if you would. What were your observations on the ground?
Well, I went to Washington the day after the inauguration to do a day after piece. And my objective was to document the sights and sounds of the city. What I encountered was a strange calm or quiet that had descended over the city. It was as if all of Washington had just exhaled. And on the avenues and behind the barricades, security personnel and workmen far outnumbered the civilians, most of whom strolled the streets as if they were on holiday or something. I mean, it was really weird. Perimeter fencing around the National Mall, Washington Monument, and reflecting pool, which abuts the Lincoln Memorial on one end, and the World War II Museum on the other, were being torn down by the workers. But the perimeter fencing and barbed wire, concerta wire, C-wire, which rings the Capitol, covering, in my estimate, I don't know, at least 2-3 city blocks, will likely remain in place for the foreseeable future.
Normally, of course, Inauguration time is a period in which D.C. sees an influx in tourism. I know certainly in 2008, when I was involved with the Obama-Biden inauguration, we couldn't even find a cot in town in the surrounding area. Is D.C. seeing any increase in tourism because of these ceremonies?
Well, certainly not this year, that's for sure, and sadly not for the next few years at least. Washington is likely to remain a city with a more hardened security posture, where public access to monuments and parks and open spaces will likely either be barred or significantly restricted. So the People's City, our nation's capital, will remain in that posture, I think, for some time.
Well, you referenced troops, certainly the increase of the National Guard units, as well as an increase in police, both Metro DC and Capitol Police Force. I'm curious, were you able to talk to any of them? And if so, how would you describe their general mood and demeanor?
Yeah, I was. The 25,000 National Guard troops who controlled the interior perimeter inside the fence line, and the DC Metro Police Force who controlled the exterior perimeter outside the fence line remained out in force. They did. But I would describe, again, their security posture as low ready. I did have a chance to chat with some DC Metro officers who seemed relaxed, I guess I would say almost relieved. But I also chatted briefly with one Capitol Police officer who told me that he was holding up.
Along those lines, Lew, I have to ask about the mindset of our young men and women serving in our National Guard unit. They, of course, are charged the same way our military is in full, to protect America against all threats, both foreign and, of course, domestic. And in this case, the threat eminently seems to be within our own borders, domestic. I'm curious if you could feel a certain mindset within them, a certain level of commitment to duty, as it were, knowing that they might have to take action against other American civilians, and especially as this is seemingly going to turn into an extended tour of duty serving in our nation's capital. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember that the women and men who serve in the National Guard also have day jobs, right? I mean, they're teachers and students, engineers, healthcare workers, web designers, landscapers, general contractors, and so forth. They do have lives to go back to, and so the question is when. At last report, I heard a timeline discussed that anywhere from 18,000, perhaps more, National Guard troops deployed to Washington are expected to return to their homes by month's end, which is certainly good news for those currently deployed.
Did you observe any lingering protests or anything that you would describe from your background as imminent threats?
Not that I could see, which was, again, somewhat odd. While filming, I tried to process the fact that 15 days earlier, Washington was under siege and our capital was attacked in an attempted coup to disrupt the legislative process certifying the electoral vote. So, yeah, I still have trouble wrapping my head around that, comprehending it, processing it. I've worked as a government contractor for the State Department and also for the Defense Department overseas in Afghanistan, Iraq, and also had a deployment in Washington, D.C. For a year. And I study threats, and I study strife, and I study attempted coups, which is what intel analysts do, in other countries, and just assume never here. But I think my thinking on that matter has certainly changed.
From your perspective, particularly coming from your background, Lew, with specialization and focus on terrorism in the Middle East, I'm curious if you feel that there truly is what would normally, I guess in technical terms, be described as real and present danger in not only for the moment, but also in the coming months and years of a Biden-Harris administration.
Yeah, absolutely. January 6th showed us the face and perhaps future of domestic terrorism, which now included, active duty police officers, a retired firefighter, a state legislator, a wealthy realtor who flew to Washington in a private jet, and certainly former members of the U.S. military along with others. This is a concern. Radicalization, as so many have pointed out over these last few weeks, has moved well beyond our popular images of militias, living off the grid in the woods, or tinfoil hat loners living in their parents' basement, surfing the web. It now touches our neighbors and friends and even family. For the first time, a president of the United States gave hate groups and conspiracy theorists political standing, right? Political capital, legitimacy. And when that standing came to an end with the defeat of the president, these insurrectionists, domestic terrorists, responded with violence.
Lew, we've all been reading and following the news, of course, on the FBI's very diligent and propitious work in identifying, tracking down, and arresting the numerous individuals that were part of the insurrection. I'm curious, though, from an agency perspective, do you feel the FBI will have any unique hurdles, and for that matter, do they have the resources to focus in on not only the task at hand immediately, but an ongoing investigation?
In cases of domestic terrorism, the FBI assumes the lead. And in this particular case, their crime scene is the U.S. Capitol. Right. I mean, since the attack on January 6th, the Bureau has reviewed countless hours of video footage called from social media, and along with tips, which they have pursued with all vigilance. Tips from family and friends and neighbors of the terrorists, which at last count, as of a few days ago, has resulted in over 150 arrests to date. On charges, basic charges ranging from violent entry and disorderly conduct to assault on federal officers. I think we can expect that over time, as cases are built individually against individuals who were members of the attempted coup. And, when I'm talking about the attempted coup, I'm not talking about people who were screaming their lungs out, who went to the Capitol, who stood outside the perimeter or did not breach, right? That's protest. But it became a coup when people ascended the stairs, engaged police in pitched battles, hand to hand, using whatever they had, pipes, bear spray, their fists, helmets, you name it. Once that happened, there was a group that became insurrectionists, and certainly crossing the threshold, walking into the Capitol, made it so. So it really doesn't matter whether or not you were, in your head, peaceful or not. Once you cross that threshold in the U.S. Capitol, you became a member of an attempted coup. Now, there will be gradations in terms of, I think, what people will be charged with, all the way up to and including sedition, which I guess historically has been difficult to prove because sedition normally involves planning an event that might not come to pass. Well, this is a case where your crime scene's the U.S. Capitol. The event came to pass, so people who advocated violence against the United States and engaged in violence on that day, I think, depending upon who they are, who else they might have incited around them, whether or, what was the level of their planning, what did they come prepared with and with whom. All of that will come into play in additional charges, which I expect to be filed.
Lew, what is your perspective in terms of the road ahead of us? Healing a fissure that runs way deeper than, let's say, the normal divide between the left and the right, the Republicans and the Democrats. What's ahead of us?
You know, I think the consensus among senior analysts and commentators in the national media over the last few weeks, it's been clear. Though President Trump may have left office, Trumpism remains very much on the field, right? And we find it at all levels, federal, state, and local. And it's manifesting itself in the form of state-level GOPs and their line, which will continue to remain aligned with the former president. To me, what is, again, difficult to understand is that 140 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, along with 7 United States senators, objected to the Electoral College certification after the Capitol was attacked. After the Capitol was attacked, right? I mean, these legislators walked back to the chamber through broken glass, the smell of tear gas in the air. You could imagine very much a crime scene. And so even after these individuals walked back to complete the task, there were still 147 members of both the House and the Senate who objected to the Electoral College count. That tells me a great deal that even in the aftermath, hours in the aftermath of an attempted coup, that Donald Trump's party and those who support him, the people that support him, including those in state and certainly the federal legislature, the House and the Senate, are very much with us.
Well, Lew, I want to thank you again for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you here on Tomorrow's Journey to talk with you even about heavy subjects such as politics and, in this case, domestic terrorism. Thank you again for your time and your expertise.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you, Lew. And thank you for joining us today on Tomorrow's Journey. We hope that you'll take the time to subscribe, like, share, and certainly comment. We'd love to hear from you. It's about building community, building resource together as we travel forth on tomorrow's journey. I'm Jeff Oppenheim. Stay safe, stay well, and stay informed.